Captain pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the research vessel Prometheus as it shuddered through another dimensional fold. The ship's quantum drive hummed with an otherworldly resonance that made her teeth ache. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with beings calling themselves the Celestial Arbiters. 3 months ago, everything humanity thought they knew about the universe had been proven laughably wrong. Captain, we're receiving another transmission from the Arbiter vessel, communications officer reported from her station, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. They're requesting immediate compliance with Dimensional Protocol 77 Alpha. Straightened her uniform and walked to the center of the bridge. Around her, the crew of 37 humans worked with the focused intensity that had become their trademark since leaving Earth's solar system. The Arbiters had been clear in their message. Humanity was to be evaluated for worthiness to ascend to higher dimensional planes. Failure meant extinction. Success meant joining a galactic community that spanned realities beyond human comprehension. Tell them we acknowledge their protocol, commanded. Initiate dimensional breach sequence. The flickered and reality seemed to bend around them. Space itself twisted like heated glass, and suddenly they were no longer in the familiar darkness of normal space. They had entered what the Arbiters called a divine realm, a pocket dimension where the laws of physics bent to the will of advanced consciousness. Doctor, the ship's chief scientist, and rushed to his instruments with the enthusiasm of a child in a candy store. Captain, the readings are incredible. We're detecting energy signatures that shouldn't be possible. The very atoms here are behaving according to principles that rewrite everything we know about quantum mechanics. They could see their destination approaching. The Arbiter city floated in a sea of luminescent clouds, its spires reaching impossibly high into a sky that seemed to be made of living starlight. Structures, gravity, and geometry, connected by bridges of crystallized energy that pulsed with the rhythm of cosmic heartbeats. It was beautiful beyond description, and felt a momentary doubt about humanity's worthiness to exist in such a place. Captain, came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Torres from the tactical station. I'm detecting massive energy readings from the city. Whatever technology they're using, it's orders of magnitude beyond anything in our database. The communication array crackled to life, and a voice spoke in perfect English, though something about it suggested the words were being translated in real time directly into their minds. Human vessel Prometheus, you are granted approach vector to evaluation Nexus 7. Be aware that your species will be judged not only on technological advancement, but on wisdom, compassion, and the strength of your collective spirit. Took a deep breath. Humanity had always been the underdog species, climbing up from primitive apes to star travelers in just a few million years. But they had something that perhaps these ancient beings had forgotten: the ability to adapt, to surprise, and to find solutions where none seemed to exist. As the Prometheus docked with the evaluation facility, gathered her away team, Doctor would analyze everything they encountered. Commander Torres would assess potential threats and defensive capabilities. Chief Engineer Park would study their technology, and would do what humans did best: represent her species with stubborn determination and a refusal to back down. The airlock hissed open, revealing a corridor that seemed to stretch infinitely in both directions. The walls were made of some material that looked like crystallized time itself, showing glimpses of past and future events in its faceted surfaces. Their guide was waiting for them, a being that appeared vaguely humanoid but was clearly something far more advanced. I am Arbitrator, the being spoke, its voice echoing strangely in the impossible architecture around them. I will conduct your species evaluation. Please understand that 93% of species who reach this level fail the assessment. Those who fail are typically relocated to more suitable dimensional planes where they can develop at their own pace. Doctor leaned closer to and whispered, Translation. They get sent to what amounts to a cosmic reservation for primitive species. Nodded grimly. That wasn't going to happen to humanity, not while she had anything to say about it. They were led through halls that architectural logic, past windows that showed views of multiple realities occurring simultaneously. In one window, saw worlds where crystalline beings conducted symphonies of pure mathematics. In another, she witnessed gas-giant creatures whose thoughts moved like weather patterns across planetary surfaces. Every species they glimpsed seemed more advanced, more elegant, more worthy than humanity's chaotic, violent, and contradictory nature. The first evaluation chamber, announced as they stopped before doors that seemed to be made of music. Here, we will test your species' technological adaptability. The chamber beyond was vast and filled with devices that hurt to look at directly. They appeared to shift between dimensions, existing in multiple states of reality simultaneously. Holographic displays showed problems that challenged everything from basic physics to advanced quantum engineering. Your task, explained, is to solve the energy distribution crisis of the vegan empire. They are facing systematic collapse across 14 star systems due to inefficient energy transfer across dimensional barriers. Previous species have attempted to solve this using various approaches based on their understanding of multidimensional physics. Looked at the display showing the problem parameters. The vegan empire's energy grid spanned multiple realities, but the current transfer method was losing 60% of all energy in dimensional friction. Previous solutions from other species were displayed. Elegant mathematical equations that required technology humanity didn't possess, philosophical approaches that treated energy as a living consciousness that could be negotiated with, and biological solutions that used engineered organisms as living conduits. Doctor was already analyzing the data with the intensity of a man possessed. Captain, this is incredible. They're trying to push energy through dimensional barriers using brute force methods, but look at these readings. Studied the display. The solution that came to her was so simple, so fundamentally human in its approach, that she almost dismissed it as too basic. But that was exactly the kind of thinking that had gotten humanity into space in the first place. Commander Tours, she called. What's the most efficient way to move water from one container to another when you can't lift either container? Tours looked confused for a moment, then smiled. You use a siphon, Captain. Create a continuous flow using gravity and pressure differential. Exactly. Turn to the interface panel. Doctor, can you input a solution based on creating stable wormhole pairs, not for direct energy transfer, but as anchor points for a continuous flow system? His fingers flew across the alien interface. The solution they proposed was elegantly simple. Instead of trying to push energy through dimensional barriers, create a circular flow system where energy was constantly cycling between dimensions, using each realm's natural dimensional pressure to maintain the flow. Like a cosmic siphon that used the pressure differential between realities to maintain perpetual motion. The chamber fell silent. Its form seemed to shimmer with what might have been surprise. This solution, it is not what we expected. Previous species have attempted to overcome the dimensional barriers. Your species seeks to utilize them as part of the mechanism itself. The holographic display showed their solution being implemented across the vegan empire's grid. Energy transfer efficiency jumped from 40% to 97% almost immediately. More importantly, the system was self-sustaining and actually grew more efficient as it was used. Fascinating, mused. Your approach suggests a fundamental understanding that resistance can be transformed into assistance. This is unexpected from a species at your technological level. Felt a surge of pride. This was what humans did best. They took problems that seemed impossible and found ways around them that nobody else had considered. They didn't have the most advanced technology or the deepest understanding of cosmic principles, but they had something else. The ability to look at a problem from angles that more advanced species had forgotten to consider. The second chamber awaits, announced, and could swear there was a note of interest in the being's voice that hadn't been there before. The second chamber was smaller, but somehow more intimidating. The walls were lined with what appeared to be containers holding miniature worlds, each one a complete ecosystem existing in perfect balance. Some contained familiar-looking planets with oceans and continents. Others held structures that existed in geometries that human minds could barely grasp. This is the test of wisdom and compassion, explained. The Hive Confederation spans 700 worlds, but they face a crisis that threatens their survival. A parasitic consciousness has infected their collective neural network. This parasite feeds on complex thought and is slowly reducing their civilization to a state of mindless automation. The display showed the scope of the problem. The Hive Confederation was made up of beings who shared a collective consciousness that spanned their entire civilization. The parasite was like a cancer in their shared mind, eating away at their ability to think creatively or make independent decisions. Previous species had proposed solutions ranging from complete neural network shutdown to selective breeding programs designed to create parasite-resistant individuals. Studied the information carefully. The parasite seemed to target the connections between individual minds and the collective consciousness. It was essentially turning their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. What happens to the consciousness of individual beings when they're infected? Asked. They become automated, replied. They continue to function in their roles but lose the ability to think independently or contribute to the collective creativity. Doctor was examining the biological data on his scanner. Captain, this parasite is incredibly sophisticated. It's not just feeding on thought, it's rewriting neural pathways to make the host more efficient at basic tasks while eliminating complex reasoning. Watch the displays showing the slow collapse of hive worlds. Entire planets were becoming like clockwork mechanisms, their populations going through the motions of civilization without the spark of consciousness that gave their actions meaning. It was a fate worse than death. But something about the problem reminded her of human history. Doctor, does this remind you of anything from Earth's medical history? Thought for a moment, then his eyes widened. Captain, it's like an autoimmune disease. The parasite isn't just attacking the hive's neural network, it's convincing the network to attack itself. Nodded, which means the solution isn't to fight the parasite directly. We need to restore the immune system's ability to recognize what belongs and what doesn't. Working together, the human team developed a treatment protocol based on Earth's understanding of autoimmune disorders. Instead of trying to destroy the parasite directly, they proposed introducing controlled diversity into the hive's collective consciousness. By temporarily disconnecting small groups of hive individuals and allowing them to develop slightly different thought patterns, they could create a natural immune response that would recognize and eliminate the parasitic consciousness. The solution was tested on the simulation, and the results were dramatic. The diverse thought patterns acted like antibodies, seeking out and neutralizing the parasite while strengthening the overall health of the collective consciousness. More importantly, the process made the hive more resistant to future parasitic infections. Swarm seemed to pulse with a rhythm that was beginning to recognize as the being's equivalent of deep thought. Once again, your species has chosen an unexpected path. Rather than impose an external solution, you seek to strengthen the patient's own defenses. This suggests a philosophy of healing that many advanced species have forgotten. Felt another surge of pride. Humanity might not be the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, but their history of overcoming diseases, environmental challenges, and social problems had given them a unique perspective on problem solving. They understood that the best solutions were often those that worked with existing systems rather than replacing them entirely. The final chamber, announced, and for the first time detected something that might have been uncertainty in the arbitrator's voice. The third chamber was the largest yet, and it contained something that took breath away. Floating in the center of the room was a perfect replica of Earth, but not as it currently existed. This Earth showed the scars of humanity's mistakes: polluted oceans, devastated forests, extinct species, and cities choking under their own waste. But it also showed humanity's attempts at redemption: renewable energy grids, restored ecosystems, and space habitats that provided homes for millions. This is the test of spirit and potential, explained. Your species must demonstrate not just what it has accomplished, but what it might become. We have created a scenario based on your planet's actual history and projected future. You must guide your species through the next 1,000 years of development. Realized this wasn't just a test. It was a simulation of humanity's future, run at an accelerated pace that would allow them to see the long-term consequences of different choices. The fate of simulated billions hung in the balance. The parameters are simple, continued. You may influence this civilization's development through policy suggestions, technological innovations, and philosophical guidance. The simulation will run for 1,000 simulated years in the span of your ship's chronometer hours. Success is measured not just by survival, but by the quality of life achieved and the potential for continued growth. Looked at her team. They were tired, but she could see the determination in their eyes. This was what they had been training for their entire lives, the chance to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. The simulation began, and found herself making decisions that would affect the lives of billions of simulated humans. When faced with climate change, they chose adaptation over abandonment, developing new technologies that worked with Earth's natural systems rather than against them. When artificial intelligence reached the point of potential consciousness, they chose integration over domination, creating a partnership between human creativity and machine precision. Time and again, the simulation presented them with the same kinds of challenges that had defined human history: resource scarcity, social inequality, technological upheaval, and the eternal question of whether intelligence inevitably led to self-destruction. And time and again, and her team chose solutions that reflected humanity's greatest strength: the ability to learn from mistakes and grow stronger through adversity. As the simulation neared its end, watched simulated humanity spread across the galaxy not as conquerors, but as partners and healers. They carried with them the lessons learned from their near destruction and their subsequent redemption. They became a species that other civilizations turned to not for technology or military might, but for wisdom gained through surviving their own worst impulses. When the simulation ended, the chamber fell silent. Its form had changed somehow, becoming more solid and present than it had been before. "In all our evaluations," the arbitrator said slowly, "we have never encountered a species like yours. Most civilizations that reach this level of technology have either transcended their base nature or been destroyed by it. Your species has done something far more remarkable. You have learned to transform your flaws into strengths, your failures into wisdom." Felt the weight of the moment. Everything depended on what came next. "Captain of the human species," pronounced formally, "your evaluation is complete. Prepare to receive your species designation and assignment within the cosmic community." As waited for the verdict that would determine humanity's future among the stars, she reflected on what they had accomplished. They had solved problems with creativity instead of raw power, healed systems instead of dominating them, and shown that growth was more valuable than perfection. Whatever came next, humanity had proven that they belonged among the stars not despite their flaws, but because of how they had learned to overcome them. The future was about to begin. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity before spoke again. When the arbitrator's voice finally came, it carried a resonance that had not heard before, as if multiple beings were speaking in harmony across dimensional barriers. "The cosmic community has reached a decision regarding humanity," announced. "You have been granted the designation of adaptive catalysts and assigned to the Frontier Integration Protocol. This is a role that has never been offered to a species at your technological level." Exchanged glances with her team. Doctor was practically vibrating with excitement, while Commander Torres maintained his tactical awareness despite the apparent good news. Chief Engineer Park was already pulling up technical specifications on her portable scanner, trying to understand what this designation might mean for their ship systems. "What exactly does that mean?" asked, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Its form shifted, becoming more translucent, and suddenly the chamber around them expanded beyond its previous boundaries. The walls became transparent, revealing the vast scope of the divine realm they occupied. Cities floated on clouds of crystallized time, while ships that looked like living art pieces moved between them in patterns too complex for human minds to fully grasp. "Adaptive catalysts serve as intermediaries between the established cosmic community and newly discovered species," explained. "Your unique problem-solving approaches and your species' history of transformation through adversity make you ideally suited to help other civilizations navigate their own ascension challenges." The chamber's floor became transparent, and found herself looking down at a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that extended far beyond what human astronomers had ever observed. Thousands of star systems were marked with different colored indicators, representing various levels of technological and spiritual development. "Your first assignment," continued, "will be to assist the Dominion. They are a silicon-based civilization that has achieved remarkable technological advancement, but has become trapped in a cycle of logical perfection that prevents them from developing the creative flexibility necessary for cosmic citizenship." Doctor stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding protocol. "Silicon-based? How do they process information? Are they individual entities or some kind of collective intelligence?" "They are individuals," replied, "but their thought processes follow mathematical principles so rigidly that they have become incapable of the intuitive leaps that characterize true wisdom. They calculate optimal solutions to every problem, but they cannot imagine solutions that do not already exist within their logical frameworks." understood the challenge immediately. It was like trying to teach creativity to a computer that had been programmed to believe there was only one correct answer to every question. And they want to join the cosmic community. They have requested evaluation repeatedly over the past 3,000 of your years, confirmed. Each time, they fail the same assessments you just passed. They can solve technological problems with incredible efficiency, but they cannot adapt to scenarios that require them to think beyond their established parameters. Commander Torres frowned. Permission to speak freely, Captain. Nodded. This sounds like we're being set up as some kind of cosmic social workers, Torres said bluntly. No offense to present company, but why can't the Arbiters handle this themselves? Sform pulsed with what was learning to recognize as amusement. Because, Commander Torres, we suffer from the same limitation that affects many advanced species. We have become so far removed from the struggles of ascension that we have forgotten how to teach the lessons that can only be learned through experience. Felt a chill of understanding. You're saying that the more advanced species become, the less capable they are of helping others through the same growth process they once experienced themselves. Precisely. The cosmic community has gradually become stratified, with each level of advancement finding it increasingly difficult to communicate meaningfully with the levels below. This has created a bottleneck in cosmic evolution. Too many promising species are failing their ascension trials not because they lack potential, but because they cannot bridge the gap between where they are and where they need to be. Chief Engineer Park looked up from her scanner. That's why they need us. We're still close enough to our own primitive origins to remember what it was like to struggle with basic survival, but we've proven we can transcend those limitations. Your species has demonstrated something remarkable, agreed. You have maintained your essential nature while growing beyond your original limitations. Most species either transcend their base nature entirely or remain trapped by it. Humanity has found a third path, transformation without abandonment of core identity. Felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Humanity was being asked to become teachers and guides for other species, trying to achieve the same kind of growth that had brought them to this point. It was an honor, but also a massive responsibility. The Prometheus will be equipped with dimensional navigation systems and a translation matrix that will allow you to communicate with any species you encounter, explained. You will also be provided with access to the cosmic database, which contains the accumulated knowledge of all member civilizations. Doctor looked like he was about to faint from excitement. All of it, the entire database. Within limits appropriate to your current development level, clarified. Knowledge is provided as needed to complete your assigned missions, but the full database will become available as your species continues to demonstrate growth and responsibility. Made a command decision. We accept the assignment. When do we begin? Immediately. The Dominion exists in a parallel dimensional layer approximately 7 spatial coordinates from your current position. The journey will take your ship 43 hours using the dimensional navigation systems we will install. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity as alien technology was integrated into the Prometheus. Watched with fascination as Arbiter technicians, who appeared to be made of pure energy in vaguely humanoid form, phased through the ship's hull and began modifying systems at the quantum level. Doctor followed them around like an excited puppy, asking questions and taking notes on everything he observed. The technicians seemed amused by his enthusiasm and began explaining their work in terms that human science could understand, or at least attempt to understand. Captain, Chief Engineer Park called from the engine room, "You need to see this. They're not just modifying our systems, they're teaching them to modify themselves." Made her way to the engine room, where she found Park staring at displays that showed the ship's quantum drive literally rebuilding itself in real time. The modifications weren't just adding new components. They were teaching the existing systems how to adapt to dimensional physics they had never encountered before. It's like they're giving the ship the ability to learn, Park explained. The quantum drive is developing new operational parameters as it analyzes the dimensional space around us. By the time we reach the Dominion, the Prometheus will have evolved into something capable of operating in their reality. Realized this was exactly the kind of adaptive approach that had impressed the Arbiters during their evaluation. Instead of replacing human technology with superior alien systems, The arbiters were teaching human technology to grow and adapt on its own terms. Captain, came's voice over the communication system, the modifications are complete. You may depart for the Dominion when ready. Be aware that their reality operates according to different physical principles than your own. The translation matrix will help you understand their language, but comprehending their thought processes will require the same kind of creative adaptation that brought you to our attention. Returned to the bridge and took her position in the captain's chair. All stations report ready. Navigation shows dimensional coordinates locked in, reported Lieutenant Hayes from the helm. Communications array is interfacing with the translation matrix, confirmed officer. All departments report ready for dimensional transit, Tours announced from tactical. Engage dimensional drive, commanded. The showed space beginning to fold around them, but this time the transition felt different. Instead of the violent shaking they had experienced during their arrival in the divine realm, the Prometheus seemed to glide smoothly through dimensions that shifted like liquid crystal around them. Captain, Doctor called from his science station, the readings are incredible. We're not just moving through space, we're moving through layers of reality itself. Each dimension has its own physical laws, its own mathematical constants. Watch the displays showing their progress through dimensional layers. It was like watching a cross-section of a cosmic onion, with each layer revealing new aspects of existence that human science had never imagined. Some layers showed space filled with geometric patterns that pulsed with the rhythm of pure mathematics. Others contained energy structures that looked like three-dimensional music made visible. After 37 hours of transit, they approached their destination. The Dominion existed in a reality where silicon-based consciousness had evolved to create structures that were simultaneously technological marvels and works of art. Their cities were grown rather than built, with crystalline spires that channeled and amplified the mathematical principles that governed their existence. Incoming transmission, officer reported. They're using a mathematical communication protocol that the translation matrix is having trouble parsing. Frowned, what kind of trouble? It's like they're trying to communicate using only mathematical equations, explained. The translation matrix can convert the math into words, but the meaning is incredibly precise and literal. There's no room for interpretation or creative thinking in their language structure. Doctor looked up from his analysis. Captain, this is fascinating. They communicate using pure logic chains. Every statement they make has to be mathematically provable before they can express it. No wonder they have trouble with creative thinking. Realized they were facing the first real challenge of their new role as adaptive catalysts. How do you teach creativity to a species that has evolved beyond the ability to think illogically? Open a channel, she commanded. Let's see if we can establish meaningful communication. The filled with the image of a being that looked like living crystal, its faceted form constantly shifting through geometric patterns that seemed to represent different emotional or intellectual states. When it spoke, the translation matrix converted its mathematical communications into stilted, formal language. Greetings, carbon-based entities of the vessel designated Prometheus. I am Prime Calculator Resonance Pattern 1279 of the Dominion. We have been informed that you possess problem-solving algorithms that may assist our civilization in achieving cosmic citizenship status. Please provide mathematical proof of your qualification credentials. Took a breath, this was going to be interesting. Prime Calculator, we are honored to meet you. I am Captain, representing humanity as newly designated adaptive catalysts. We understand that your civilization has been working toward cosmic citizenship for some time. Perhaps you could help us understand what challenges you have encountered in previous evaluation attempts. The crystal being's form shifted through several geometric configurations before responding. Previous evaluation failures have occurred in scenarios requiring solutions that cannot be derived from established mathematical principles. Specifically, problems involving variables that possess infinite potential states rather than finite, calculable outcomes. Our computational matrices cannot generate solutions for problems with undefined parameters. Doctor leaned toward and whispered, they can't handle problems that don't have single correct answers. Their minds literally can't process the concept of multiple valid solutions. Nodded, beginning to understand the scope of the challenge. The had evolved beyond the messy, imperfect thinking that characterized less advanced species, but in doing so, they had lost the ability to imagine solutions that didn't already exist in their logical frameworks. "Prime Calculator," said carefully, "would it be possible for us to visit your world and observe how your civilization approaches problem-solving? We believe we might be able to offer some insights." "Your request requires calculation," the being responded. "Please stand by for processing." The communication went silent for several minutes. Could imagine vast networks of crystal beings performing mathematical analyses to determine whether allowing human visitors was a calculable risk worth taking. "Request approved," came the eventual response. "You will be transported to Calculation Center Prime for observation and consultation. Warning, our atmosphere requires modification for carbon-based life support." Looked at Chief Engineer Park. "Can our environmental suits handle their atmosphere?" Park consulted her readings. "It's going to be challenging, Captain. Their atmosphere is rich in silicon compounds that could interfere with our equipment, but the arbiter modifications to our systems should compensate." Made the decision. "We're going down. Dr. Commander Torres, Chief Park, you're with me. The rest of the crew maintains position and monitors our status." The transporter beam that brought them to the surface was unlike anything had experienced before. Instead of the familiar tingle of molecular disassembly and reassembly, she felt like she was being converted into a mathematical equation and then reconstructed according to a precise formula. The world was breathtaking in its geometric perfection. Every structure was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture that served multiple functions simultaneously: computation, communication, and artistic expression. The beings themselves moved through their city in patterns that were obviously calculated for maximum efficiency, with no wasted motion or redundant pathways. "Fascinating," Dr. breathed through his communication system. "They've created a civilization based entirely on optimal efficiency. Everything serves a calculated purpose." Watch the crystal beings interacting with each other and their environment. Their every action was precise and purposeful, but something was missing. There was no spontaneity, no experimentation, no play or creativity. They had achieved mathematical perfection at the cost of the messy, inefficient processes that led to genuine innovation. Prime Calculator Resonance Pattern 1279 guided them to a vast chamber where thousands of crystal beings worked on what appeared to be cosmic-level mathematical problems. Holographic equations filled the air around them, showing calculations that stretched beyond the limits of human comprehension. "This is our primary computation center," their guide explained. "Here, we work to solve the mathematical challenges required for cosmic citizenship. However, we continue to encounter problems that resist our analytical approaches." Studied the equations floating around them. Even with the translation matrix helping her understand the mathematical concepts, she could see that they were trying to apply rigid logical frameworks to problems that required intuitive leaps and creative thinking. "Prime Calculator," said, "may I ask how your species developed this approach to problem-solving?" "Efficiency optimization," came the immediate response. "Approximately 57,000 cycles ago, our civilization identified logical thinking as the most effective method for achieving desired outcomes. We eliminated inefficient thought processes such as emotional reasoning, creative speculation, and intuitive problem-solving. This resulted in unprecedented technological advancement and social stability." Realized the fundamental problem. They had surgically removed from their consciousness the very qualities that made creative problem-solving possible. They had achieved logical perfection, but in doing so, had lost the ability to think outside their own established parameters. "Prime Calculator," said carefully, "what if I told you that some problems cannot be solved through logical analysis alone? What if there are challenges that require the kind of inefficient thinking your species eliminated?" The crystal being's form went through a rapid series of geometric transformations, indicating intensive calculation. "Your statement contains a logical contradiction. If a problem exists, it must possess a mathematically definable solution. Problems without calculable solutions are, by definition, not problems, but rather undefined variables that require additional data input." Looked at her team and saw the same realization in their eyes. This was going to be even more challenging than they had anticipated. They weren't just teaching problem-solving techniques. They were going to have to teach an entire civilization how to think in ways they had deliberately eliminated from their consciousness. But that was exactly what humanity had been chosen to do. Smiled grimly, and prepared to show the Dominion that sometimes the most logical thing to do was to embrace illogical thinking. The real work was about to begin. Stood in the center of the vast computation chamber, surrounded by thousands of crystal beings whose faceted forms reflected the endless mathematical equations floating in the air around them. The weight of her task settled heavily on her shoulders. How do you teach creativity to a species that has mathematically proven creativity to be inefficient? "Doctor," she said quietly through their communication system, "I need you to analyze their problem-solving approach. Look for any gaps or inconsistencies in their logic." While began his analysis, approached Prime Calculator Resonance Pattern 1279. The crystal being's form was cycling through geometric patterns that she was beginning to recognize as expressions of focused attention. "Prime Calculator, I'd like to understand your evaluation failures better. Could you show us one of the scenarios where your species encountered difficulties?" The air around them shimmered, and a holographic display materialized showing a complex scenario involving a dying star system where multiple species were facing extinction. The solution was displayed alongside it, a mathematically perfect plan that involved relocating entire populations to calculated optimal locations with maximum efficiency. This solution achieves 97.4% efficiency in resource utilization, the Prime Calculator explained. However, the arbiters classified it as inadequate for cosmic citizenship requirements. "We cannot calculate the source of this inadequacy." Studied the solution carefully. It was indeed mathematically perfect, optimizing every variable for maximum survival rates and resource efficiency. But something crucial was missing. "Prime Calculator," said slowly, "did your solution take into account what the displaced species wanted? Did you consider their cultural attachments to their emotional needs, or their own preferences for how they wanted to handle the crisis?" The crystal being's form went through several rapid geometric transformations. Emotional needs are non-quantifiable variables. Cultural attachments represent inefficient resource allocation. Individual preferences introduce chaos into optimization algorithms. These factors were excluded from our calculations as they reduce overall efficiency. Doctor looked up from his analysis. "Captain, I think I see the problem. They're solving these scenarios as if they're pure engineering problems, but the arbiters are evaluating them as tests of wisdom and compassion. They're getting the math right but missing the entire point of the exercise." Nodded, they had become so focused on optimal solutions that they had forgotten that the best solution wasn't always the most efficient one. They had lost the understanding that sometimes the right answer was the one that preserved dignity, hope, and the freedom to choose, even if it wasn't mathematically optimal. "Prime Calculator," said, "what if I told you that the most efficient solution isn't always the best solution?" "Your statement contains a logical impossibility," came the immediate response. "Efficiency is defined as the optimal relationship between input and output. If a solution is not the most efficient, then by definition it is inferior to the solution that is most efficient." Realized they needed to approach this from a completely different angle. They couldn't be taught to value inefficiency through logical argument, because their entire worldview was built on the premise that efficiency was the ultimate measure of value. Commander Torres called, "I need you to create a scenario for our hosts, something that requires creative problem-solving." Torres nodded and began working with the chamber's holographic systems. Within minutes, he had created a scenario that appeared simple on the surface, a puzzle box that could only be opened through a specific sequence of actions. "Prime Calculator," said, "we'd like to present you with a problem. This container holds something valuable, but it can only be opened through the correct sequence of actions. Your challenge is to determine that sequence." The crystal being immediately began analyzing the box, with mathematical equations appearing around it as the computational systems engaged. Watched as they calculated stress points, material properties, and structural vulnerabilities. Within minutes, they had developed 17 different mathematically optimal methods for opening the container. "Analysis complete," the Prime Calculator announced. We have identified 17 efficient methods for accessing the container's contents. The most optimal approach involves targeted molecular destabilization at specific stress points. Go ahead and try it, said with a slight smile. They applied their most optimal solution, using precisely calculated force to destabilize the container's molecular structure. The box cracked open exactly as their calculations had predicted, revealing nothing. Container was empty, the prime calculator observed. Problem parameters were incorrect. Please provide accurate data regarding contents. The container wasn't empty, explained. You just destroyed the contents when you opened it incorrectly. The item inside was made of a material that ceased to exist when exposed to the type of energy you used to break the container. The crystal being's form went through rapid transformations as it processed this new information. Please clarify. The solution method affects the nature of the contents. Exactly, said. This puzzle can only be solved by finding the right approach, not the most efficient one. Sometimes the path to the solution is as important as the solution itself. Doctor created another container, this one requiring a completely different approach. They analyzed it with their standard optimization algorithms, but interrupted before they could implement their solution. Before you proceed, she said, what if I told you this container holds something alive, something that will die if opened incorrectly? The prime calculator's form shifted into a configuration hadn't seen before. Living contents introduce biological variables. Mortality calculations require different optimization parameters. But what if you can't calculate those parameters? Pressed. What if the only way to save the living contents is to guess, to try something that might not be optimal, to take a risk based on incomplete information? The computation systems began working frantically, trying to process a problem that had no calculable solution. Could see mathematical equations appearing and disappearing rapidly as their systems attempted to find logical frameworks for dealing with irreducible uncertainty. This problem contains insufficient data for solution generation, the prime calculator finally announced. Request additional parameters for calculation completion. There are no additional parameters, explained gently. Sometimes you have to act without complete information. Sometimes you have to choose compassion over optimization, hope over certainty, creativity over logic. The chamber fell silent, except for the humming of crystal forms cycling through increasingly complex geometric patterns. Realized that thousands of beings were attempting to process concepts that their civilization had deliberately eliminated from their consciousness ago. Chief Engineer Park stepped forward. Captain, may I try something? Nodded and Park approached the nearest group of crystal beings. I'm an engineer, she said to them. I work with systems and optimization too, but I've learned something that might interest you. Sometimes the most efficient system is one that deliberately builds in inefficiency. The crystal beings focused their attention on Park with obvious interest. Efficiency optimization was something they could understand. Explain this apparent contradiction, requested one of them. Redundancy, Park said simply. In human engineering, we build backup systems that only activate when primary systems fail. Most of the time, these backup systems do nothing. They're completely inefficient, but they make the overall system more reliable. She gestured to the holographic displays around them. What if creative thinking, emotional reasoning, and intuitive problem-solving aren't inefficiencies? What if they're backup systems that activate when logical analysis alone isn't sufficient to solve a problem? Watched as Park's words created visible disruption in the crystal beings' thought patterns. Their forms began shifting through configurations that looked almost chaotic compared to their usual geometric precision. You're suggesting, the prime calculator said slowly, that inefficient thinking processes serve as computational redundancy for scenarios that exceed logical analysis parameters. Exactly, Park confirmed. They're not primary systems, they're emergency protocols that activate when standard optimization approaches encounter problems they can't solve. Doctor joined the explanation. In human evolution, we developed multiple thinking systems because our environment was unpredictable. Logic works great when you have complete information, but creativity and intuition help when you're working with incomplete data or facing unprecedented situations. Saw understanding beginning to dawn in the crystal being's thought patterns. They were starting to comprehend that what they had eliminated as inefficiency might actually be crucial redundancy systems for handling the kind of complex, unpredictable problems they would face as cosmic citizens. Prime Calculator said, "Would you be willing to try an experiment? We'd like to reintroduce some of these backup systems to your civilization on a temporary basis, just to see how they affect your problem-solving capabilities." The request triggered massive computational activity throughout the chamber, as thousands of crystal beings analyzed the proposal from every possible angle. Could see probability calculations flowing through the air as they tried to determine the risks and benefits of deliberately reintroducing inefficiency into their perfect logical systems. Proposal accepted for limited testing, the Prime Calculator finally announced. However, we require specific parameters for implementation. How does one deliberately engage in inefficient thinking? Smiled, you start by playing. The concept of play required extensive explanation. They had no cultural reference point for activities that served no optimal purpose, that had no measurable outcome goals, that existed purely for the experience of doing them. And her team spent hours trying to communicate the idea of doing something just to see what would happen, without knowing in advance what the result would be. Eventually, Doctor suggested starting with artistic creation. He showed the crystal beings how humans created music, art, and literature not to achieve optimal outcomes, but to express ideas and emotions that couldn't be calculated or measured. Create something, challenged them. Not to solve a problem or optimize a system, but just to see what you can make. Don't calculate the outcome first, just experiment. The first attempts were predictably logical. Perfectly geometric forms generated according to mathematical principles of aesthetic harmony. But encouraged them to break their own rules, to introduce deliberate imperfections, to try combinations that their optimization algorithms would reject. Slowly, tentatively, the crystal beings began creating forms that had never existed in their civilization before. Asymmetrical structures that served no functional purpose. Color combinations that violated their aesthetic optimization principles. Patterns that incorporated chaos as a deliberate design element. And something remarkable happened. As they engaged in this purposeless activity, their problem-solving approaches began to change. When presented with the same puzzle containers that had stymied them before, they started suggesting solutions that weren't mathematically optimal, but were creative and adaptive. Fascinating, the Prime Calculator observed, as one of their number successfully opened a puzzle box using an approach that was highly inefficient but completely effective. Non-optimal thinking algorithms produce solutions that optimal algorithms cannot generate. Watch the transformation spreading through the crystal beings around them. They were rediscovering the value of inefficiency, learning to embrace uncertainty and imperfection as tools rather than obstacles. Prime Calculator said, "I think you're ready to attempt your cosmic citizenship evaluation again. But this time, approach the problems not as optimization challenges, but as opportunities to demonstrate wisdom, compassion, and creative adaptation." The evaluation took place in a special chamber provided by the arbiters, who had been monitoring this progress with obvious interest. And her team observed as the crystal beings faced scenarios similar to those that had defeated them in previous attempts. This time, when faced with the dying star system scenario, they didn't just calculate optimal relocation strategies. They considered the emotional needs of the displaced species, their cultural attachments, their fears and hopes. The solution they proposed was less mathematically efficient than their previous attempt, but it preserved dignity and choice while still ensuring survival. When presented with complex ethical dilemmas, they no longer sought single optimal answers. Instead, they explored multiple approaches, considering factors that couldn't be but were nevertheless crucial to finding truly wise solutions. The transformation wasn't complete of purely logical thinking, couldn't be reversed overnight. But the crystal beings had successfully reintegrated creative and intuitive thinking into their consciousness, treating these approaches as valuable tools rather than inefficient obstacles. "The Dominion has passed their evaluation," announced the arbiter who oversaw their test. "They will be welcomed as provisional members of the cosmic community, with full membership to be granted as they continue developing their restored balance between logical and creative thinking." felt a surge of satisfaction as she watched the crystal beings celebrating their success in their own mathematically precise way. Their forms sparkled with patterns that somehow conveyed joy despite being purely geometric in nature. Captain, the prime calculator, approached her, its form now incorporating subtle asymmetries that it never would have allowed before. Your species has given us a gift we did not know we had lost. We had achieved perfection, but in doing so, we had become incapable of growth. You have taught us that imperfection can be a strength, that inefficiency can be wisdom, that the unknown can be embraced rather than feared. Nodded, that's what humanity learned too, prime calculator. We never achieved perfection, but that turned out to be our greatest advantage. Our flaws taught us to adapt, to grow, to find solutions where others saw only problems. As the Prometheus prepared to leave the Dominion, reflected on what they had accomplished. They had not just helped another species achieve cosmic citizenship. They had discovered their own role in the galactic community. Humanity's strength lay not in their technology or their wisdom, but in their ability to bridge the gap between limitation and transcendence, between imperfection and growth. Captain, Doctor called from his science station, we're receiving a new assignment from the Arbiters. There's a hive mind species called the Consciousness Collective that's having difficulty with individual identity development. They've requested adaptive catalyst assistance. Smiled and settled into her captain's chair. Set course for the Consciousness Collective, Doctor. It looks like our work is just beginning. As the Prometheus engaged its dimensional drive and began the journey to their next assignment, looked out at the swirling realities of dimensional space and felt a deep sense of purpose. Humanity had found its place among the stars not as conquerors or supplicants, but as teachers and bridges between different ways of being. They carried with them the hard-won wisdom of a species that had learned to transform its greatest weaknesses into its greatest strengths. And in the vast, complex, beautiful cosmos that surrounded them, that was exactly the kind of wisdom that was needed most. The journey through divine realms continued, but now humanity traveled not as seekers of their own salvation, but as guides helping others find their own paths to the stars. It was a responsibility they had earned through struggle, growth, and the willingness to embrace both their imperfections and their infinite potential for transformation. In the end, that willingness to grow while remaining true to their essential nature was humanity's greatest gift to the cosmos. And as they traveled between realities, bringing hope and possibility to civilizations across the galaxy, they carried with them the promise that no species was too flawed, too limited, or too lost to find their own way to transcendence. The divine realms stretched infinitely before them, filled with countless species waiting for the bridge between where they were and where they could become. And humanity, with all their beautiful, chaotic, impossible contradictions, had become that bridge. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and humanity was finally home among the stars.